Hello and welcome. It's Shelley Carpati, writer and host of the Spicy Soul Mama podcast. On this show, we delve into how we connect our spiritual lives for authentic living. I am bringing authentic, sometimes raw and compassionate conversations for insight into our universal truths and what is required to heal ourselves and then the world.
Mhm.
In a world that often feels chaotic and overwhelming, I hope these conversations will spark curiosity and plant tiny seeds of awareness so that we might all collectively learn, grow, and remember our humanity and interconnectedness. And don't forget to find me on Substack to subscribe for updates at Spicy Soul Mama. Welcome to the Spicy Soul Mama podcast, Lizzie Langston. She is a certified trauma informed life coach, psychic medium, and trauma recovery expert with over 7 years of experience guiding women through personal transformation, spiritual awakenings, and times of life change, including postpartum. Specializing in helping women navigate times of great life transition or inner darkness, Lizzie combines her intuitive abilities with a trauma-informed coaching to empower women to nurture their body back to a sense of safety and stability, and to reclaim their executive functioning and creative ambition. So, welcome, Lizzie.
Thank you so much, Shelley. I feel so happy that I get to be here on your podcast, The Spicy Soul Mama. I've loved the name of your podcast since I first saw it. And the
Yeah.
more I got to read your Substack, the more I was like, I want to talk with her.
Yeah, it's been so wonderful being in the Substack community and meeting like-minded writers and
Yes.
creators.
Yeah.
And, really, I felt the same way. I was like, oh, this girl is like really got some stuff going on, and I need to
Thank
talk to
you.
her as well. So I'm so
Yeah.
happy you're here. So
Me
yeah, I
too.
would love to learn and, share with us what is, a little bit about your journey and your
hmm
story and how you
hmm
arrived. I mean, I have so many questions, of
Yes.
course,
I
about,
have so much story. So it's perfect.
so yeah, so what
Okay.
I guess specifically the part of your story I think would be really interesting is like, how did you become a trauma-informed life coach? Let's start there and then
Yes.
tell us when and how did the psychic abilities play into this?
Yeah, I would love to share that with you. I want to just give a little love nod to all the listeners, you guys. Like we truly are doing this for you and we just are so thrilled to talk spiritual to you today.
Yes.
So our hearts are wide open. I okay, so I had my children. My motherhood landscape is when I first had my first initiation into I would call it the darkness of the subconscious, which is when we're little, that's where the trauma goes. It goes into our subconscious, or in other words, your body takes over your mind and will store it and put it away for later until you have the resources and the safety and the time and the energy and the capacity to like go through it.
Hmm.
So, for whatever reason, my body decided that postpartum with my second child was going to be a great time to bring it up. But at the time, I didn't know that's what was happening. So if you would have asked me at the time, I was probably 25, maybe having my second baby. I found my partner and got married really young. And we've been married now for 12 years. And if you would have asked me at the time what was going on, I would have been like, could you tell me? I have no idea. The word depression or anxiety was not in my vocabulary.
Mm.
I was the happy girl growing up.
Hmm.
I was the happy peacemaker, just bubbly. And so to be numb and frozen and in and out of such deep sadness, but also this numbness, and then other times panic attacks,
Hmm.
not functioning. This was completely a shock to my conscious mind, my ego, if you will,
Yeah.
right? Like my
Yeah.
sense of identity had no
Yeah.
clue what to do with this.
Right.
And so my story over three different episodes of deep depression over the years of having my children I began to understand as I went through the healthcare system and tried everything. I tried the antidepressants to the max dosage. I tried doing a natural birth at a birth center instead of the epidural at the hospital. I switched doctors. I switched birthplaces. I tried support groups and therapy, everything to try to avoid this stuff. So, I tried all of the surface stuff and I ended up just I had to go inward, and I had
Yeah.
to, in a moment of desperation, my in-laws, they said, "Hey, let us take your kids." Because I was really, my back was up against a wall. And this was a turning point for me. I hadn't had my spiritual awakening yet, but this was ultimately spiritual in nature, which is that I had to start peeling away the layers
Hmm.
of who I thought I was.
Well, I'll just say right there, just for a moment, that, you did, like this is what we do as mothers, right? We figure out like, okay, we want to do all these things right, and we want to have all this control so that we can protect our babies, but then we forget that we're part of that equation, right?
Hmm.
And so having that, I understand what that means to have that shock of like, things are just not, I just want to acknowledge that things are not appearing the way that you had envisioned. And that's just a
Right.
really major thing. And
It's very
yeah,
jolting
yeah,
to your sweet little lovely daughter of the patriarchy self that would just be the best mom ever. I was ready to self-sacrifice to the maximum to like
yeah,
be the mom and do the thing.
right,
And my
right.
body was like, by the way, I have children in me. I have little inner children that I need you to mother too. So
Yeah,
not just your
yeah.
physical children. So I had to learn to become my inner mother.
I just feel
And
like, sorry, I
yeah,
just feel like people don't get that,
yeah,
that comes up. Like here we are, we're still children having children, no
absolutely.
matter what age we are. So I had my first at 30, but I
Hmm.
just think that's such an important point that we don't acknowledge or realize that, when we have children, it still ignites our own little child,
It
right?
actually can trigger our own inner children
Yeah,
to speak
yeah,
up and say, I never got loved. How is it
right.
fair that you're going to love this newborn when I was a newborn? I wasn't attended to, or when I was, sometimes it's
Mm,
when my kids got older. So fast forward, we lived in Costa Rica at one point for 7 months during the pandemic
mm-hmm,
and as a family. So I have four children, ages 10 to 18 months. I took a
uh-huh,
big break. So my first three were really quick together, and then a 6.5 year break, and a dog, a German short haired pointer. Anyway, so we were in Costa Rica, and this is the first time I learned about trauma
mm-hmm,
because after 4 years at that point as a certified life coach, helping postpartum women because of my own story,
mm,
I didn't know that I was about to be initiated a level way deeper, which is
mm.
this underlying trauma that the type of coaching that I was familiar with was not touching. And in
Hmm.
fact, I actually needed to fire my coach at the time and get into it was a coaching and therapy group. It was run by a therapist and a coach, but it was trauma informed. And I had
Hmm.
to start to learn because what was happening is my complex um, post-traumatic stress from childhood. So I don't,
Hmm.
maybe people don't know. I will just say real quick that this is a brand new it's not quite a diagnosis yet. It's getting close to being admitted into the DSM, the
Hmm.
basically the manual for psychologists and everybody, counselors, therapists to use for diagnosing. But it's called CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress.
Mm.
And another colloquial term for it is complex childhood PTSD
Mm.
because
Hmm.
it's typically from your younger years, but it
Mm.
comes up in adulthood. And so
Mm.
I would be in the kitchen, let's say, with my husband and my kids and myself, and maybe my husband would um, try and discipline one of our children. Just say, "Hey, don't do that." Whatever, whatever. Maybe nothing even unreasonable. Maybe a little bit of activation in his body. Maybe he's raising his voice a little bit, but just doing the dad thing. And then my inner children that have trauma from my dad and some behaviors that maybe weren't as safe
Hmm.
um, would come to the surface. And before I knew it, I wasn't really. It didn't feel like I was his wife. It felt like I was another one of the children in the room. As far as my
Mm.
body was concerned, I would go into this PTSD flashback,
Hmm.
and I could not be a mom in those moments
Mm.
because of
Hmm.
these younger parts of me. So that's sort of the rhythm of trauma. Sometimes it can be more low impacting in our lives, and other times, like postpartum for me, it can be what one of the trauma researchers I really enjoy calls a trauma storm.
Hmm.
Her name is Anna Runkle, and she's a CPTSD specialist, and she's lived it. She calls it a trauma storm. So whether you all are in midlife or whether you're younger mom years or
Mm,
somewhere in between or beyond, any time of life, we can have what's called a trauma storm that can kind of tip us over the edge. And that's what was happening with me postpartum. And one episode of depression and anxiety at a time, I had to piece together what was going on under the surface. And that's how I kind of
mm.
entered into the trauma space.
Wow. Yeah, that's so fascinating. And it's I just to clarify, it's not it's is it like a dissociative response that you're having, like dissociating from the present moment and just going into this response?
So, so dissociation is one way that we can respond to trauma that has been stored in our body coming up. So
Mm-hmm.
dissociating can be this is more of a flashback
Mm-hmm.
where the way I'm responding is more related to the moment that I had the trauma myself. So the
Mm-hmm.
moment I was 7 years old or the moment I was 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And so I very much felt like a 10-year-old or a 7-year-old, even though
Yeah.
I'm in my mid 30s and I have at the time I had 3 kids.
Right.
It was the strangest. And I had no idea what I was experiencing. I just felt a lot of shame for not being a
Mm-hmm.
consistent parent and not
Mm-hmm.
siding with my husband and being a good co-parenting team in that
Right.
moment. I would
Yeah.
I would very much take my children's side because he was the scary dad in my body's perspective. So
Uh-huh.
this was but it is a sort of trauma response, but it is specific to having a lot of stress or trauma when you're a child. It is specific to complex childhood PTSD.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But people who have trauma from childhood can have flashbacks in their mothering and motherhood.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's really interesting because, yeah, I do think back to when I was a young parent. I think what also layered on top of it is communication, right? Because
Mhm.
suddenly when we have children, we're placed in these roles of like maybe modeling what was modeled for us growing up because that's all we knew, and
Mhm.
then not being able to express like this is how I know how to be a parent because this is what I learned.
Yeah.
And then the other person, the partner, is coming at it in the same mindset, but there's no way to learn how to actually vocalize that.
Yeah.
You're just kind
Yeah.
of going, you're like drinking from a fire hose, trying to figure out like, keeping everybody safe and fed and keeping order and control, and then also trying to communicate and still have a partnership with your loved one. So
Yeah.
there's just and then it sounds like Lizzie, like having this on top of it is so confusing and
Mhm.
intense, and so
Yeah.
it sounds like it was really great that you had already been doing some of the work
Yeah.
in your education and certification around it so that you were able to find the right support to help you through
Yeah.
it.
Finding support is imperative. Um, but I will say, even as a coach, it was still way beyond my capacity to handle because I
Hmm.
didn't, even if I would have intellectually understood what was going
Hmm.
on, which I didn't until soon after these experiences, but even if I had intellectually understood, when your body, so the sort of the key characteristic of a trauma response is
Yeah.
that your body takes over your
Hmm.
mind.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter how intellectually rooted I am in the trauma space. When my body is having a flashback, my intellectual parts are not available to me because
Hmm.
I am literally in fight or flight or freeze or fawn or feign or whatever I'm doing, right? I'm
Mm-mm.
in the trauma
Hmm.
response because my body has said, you know what? We are out of our zone of being able to handle this right now.
Hmm.
Our capacity is beyond maxed, and so we're going to just flip into this is what our body does to survive.
Yeah, yeah, great. Yeah, that sounds really hard, Lizzie, going through that. And so
But
then tell
it
me,
is everyone
yeah,
technically, like all
yeah,
of us. This is all of
yeah.
us. So I'm like,
Mm,
hopefully my sharing um helps even just one person be able to identify what's going on with them and
yeah,
have a direction of where they can go to get support. Like that's the
right.
ultimate hope, right?
So where did you find your support then?
Yeah, so it started with life coaching. After I had tried, not that I actually love therapy, it wasn't meeting me where I was at the time, and it
Hmm.
wasn't a match for the tools that I had at the time. So the first step that really helped me was starting to recognize that my thoughts are separate from me and that
Mm.
I am not my thoughts. And so
Hmm.
that was my number one step was listening to my thoughts and seeing them, but
Yeah.
not being in them.
Yeah, that's such a practice. It's a mindfulness
It's
technique for
totally,
sure.
yeah.
Hmm.
So once I had that space, because it really did give me some space in my mind and body, some
Hmm.
space between the scary thought and what I was going to do with it. And I wasn't
Yeah.
always caught in the thought. I was like, oh, that was an interesting thought. That was a scary
Hmm.
thought. Right. And so once I had that awareness, that I'm going to call that level one awakening, that really
Hmm.
was, I mean, ultimately, awakening is just levels of consciousness. And
Right.
that was my very first, like, bloop, now I have a new vantage point. So
Yeah.
once I got there, I went and got certified as a coach. And by the, like, this was life changing. It was enough for like 2 years. That's all I even needed. And then I
Hmm.
started to bump into more resistance. Sometimes I would feel like I was seeing the same thoughts over and over, even
Yeah.
though I could see them. I couldn't do anything about the fact that they were surfacing. And so that made me to start to get curious about what's called the nervous system, which is
Hmm.
our main, uh, basically, your nervous system interprets everything that's happening outside of you and inside of you. Old triggers, it interprets and decides if you're safe or not. And if it doesn't decide you're safe, then even if you wanted to be calm, you are not going to
Right.
be.
Yeah, I hear you. Oh my gosh. It's like I describe it to my students when I teach mindfulness is that we have this story that's in our nervous system, right? We have this story that and the phrases that come up in our minds over and over. It's like the grooves of a record that
Yeah.
are just deep and just playing the same song over and over again. And it is a really and to have that awareness is one thing. And then two, it sounds like the next step that you took was to get curious about it
Mhm.
and that and I think that curiosity has to be um you have to have this like loving inner talk with yourself. Like I
Yeah.
often tell students, you know, talk to yourself like you're a child. Like you have to say it's okay, honey, to
Yeah.
yourself. And
Yeah.
when they say, it's okay, I see you. Like
Yeah.
I see you, I see you're struggling, and then naming it.
Yeah.
So, and then it
That's
starts
beautiful.
to dissipate and open and
Yeah.
change. But what part of curiosity helped you to help dissipate and help it change?
Yeah. I'll be honest, at first, I didn't trust curiosity. I didn't think it would be enough, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
was still in the fight response, in the fear, in the shame even. And so I was just in a hurry to like
Mm,
feel better and to
of
stop these scary
course.
thoughts, right?
Yeah.
And this is actually in my work that I do with postpartum women specifically.
Mm-hmm.
But it can be any person that's in a very intense part of their life
Yeah.
where they almost don't recognize the way that they're showing up or the way that their brain is thinking thoughts. Like when there's
Mm-hmm.
some interesting change
Yeah.
inside of you that is sort of like, whoa, what is going on? Then this would apply to you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had to um, learn how to, so I teach this 3-step process, but I had to learn how to calm my body first because
Mm-hmm.
I could not get to curiosity if my body was not feeling safe.
Yeah, and so often we're not walking around in our bodies, we're walking around in our heads.
Totally, yes, 100%.
Yeah.
Honestly. Like I thought, like if you would have been like, "Are you in your body?" I'd be like, "Well, duh, aren't we all in our bodies? Like
Right,
otherwise
right.
what would we be? I mean, would
Right.
we be alive? I don't know." But what I didn't realize is there's actually a spectrum of how embodied you can be. So you can be alive with
Yes.
a heartbeat, but you can be very much out of your body. And
Yes.
I actually had, speaking of, we'll bridge into the spiritual here because personally, I do think that once you start to learn how to calm your body with the nervous system, you start to open to the spiritual realms. They're more available to you. So the nervous system,
Yes.
I feel like in my experience, has been very much a bridge to the spiritual. So if you're really excited
Mhm.
about the spiritual, then know that the nervous system is a great place to start.
Yes, that's
Um,
good.
but one time I was asleep and I was visiting. a person that I had to visit by court mandate, and I didn't really feel super safe. And I remember I was asleep, and in my sleep, I was out of my body completely and I was hovering over my body. But we
Mm-hmm.
have a cord, right? We have almost like an umbilical cord. So I was still corded to my body. I was alive. I didn't die, but my spirit was out. I had an out
Mm-hmm.
of body experience, completely out of,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember trying to lift my arms and I couldn't. They were just dead weight. And I was
Wow.
panicking. I was panicking. I was panicking. And then just as I was sort of panicking, my spirit apparently came back into my body because then I woke up and I could lift my arms. And I was like,
Yeah.
whoa.
That's wild. And so did that become like a frequent dream, like more than once?
No, that was just one time. I guess I
Okay.
wanted to share that. I don't know why it came to my
That's
mind, but
cool. No, that's really cool. I think it will help you verify of others that might have that experience. I've had experiences where my name, somebody like I hear my name and I would have
somebody
to
else saying
wake
it.
up. Yeah, it freaks me out.
I
But
love that.
I'm not as afraid of it anymore. I've
Yeah.
become more curious about it
Yes.
because it's definitely happened a few times.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's cool. So then what did you do next?
For after what part? Where did we
After you had your, your spiritual like out of body experience, how did you manage your curiosity and how did that like
Okay.
what led you
Yeah.
next?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I look back at my story, I really see how I was gaining more awareness over who I really am versus who I
Hmm.
thought I was. So part of being human is that our ego will over identify with
Hmm.
our identity. Like that's what the ego does. The ego loves, and I know I'm not telling you anything new. So I
Yeah.
would love I open any comments. I'm like
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
to a mindfulness teacher. But this is how I made sense of it and how,
Yeah.
inch by inch I learned that we really do have this sticky, like bless our ego's heart, but like it kind of gets it over identifies with our thoughts and it can even
Hmm.
over identify with our bodily sensations. And so
Hmm.
it's a big reason we just I was freaking out so much. That was my biggest issue. So the scare, yes, yes, I was having anxiety and depression and I was going through a hard time and it was intense. But also then on top of that, I was devastated by it. I was like, why is this happening to me? Right. I had all of the thoughts and feelings about my experience.
Hmm.
And that outer layer of all my thoughts about it is what was really creating this block for
Hmm.
me being able to take my life back and to heal and to calm down. And so, does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
it does. I mean, really what resonates for me that I identify, which I think many people can, is that we have these experiences in our life when we say, why is this happening to me?
Yeah.
And the thing is that when we can shift that into it happening for us instead of to us, whatever it is, and seeing
Yeah.
like, okay, where is the gift in this? And it's not spiritually bypassing. So maybe, let's talk about that and expand that a
Yeah.
little bit more because, when I say this to people, I said, my son's mental break at age 14, it was hell. It was like,
Mm.
I was like, why is this happening? This is so fucked up. Mental health illness doesn't run in my family. It's, that like this of this extreme. And I've been doing everything right. I've been, providing for my children. And why is this happening? And then the minute that I started having spiritual experiences throughout the course of his break, which lasted over two and a half years, I
Wow.
um, I then began to realize like, okay, I have to just surrender and
Wow.
stop being a victim.
Wow.
Why is this happening to me? Okay, what can I learn? And
Yeah.
how can it be for me? How can
Yeah.
it be for me instead of to me?
Yeah.
So without spiritually bypassing, but I definitely did for a while. So like,
Mm.
how do people, let's talk about that, like
Mm.
spiritually bypassing and what that means to you
Yeah.
and how you shifted that for yourself.
Yeah. So when you say spiritually bypassing, you're saying when we're really suffering, if we were to just say to ourselves, this is working for me, like sometimes that doesn't resonate and it feels sort of like a cop
Yeah,
out. Yeah.
totally.
Yeah. I think that it's really interesting because when we go through these intense times, one thing that helps me sort of orient through it in the beginning is to realize that we actually have two of us at any one given moment in us. We have the part of us that wants to heal and stuff. And then we have the part of us that, is mad about everything and is freaking out.
The
And
ego.
so,
Yeah.
yeah. And so maybe like your adult self, we'll call her your adult self or your inner mother, your inner highest self, your inner guide. She's like your wise one. She's like, let's say she's Shelly. Okay. She's Shelly and she's like this mindfulness teacher. She's so great. And of course, she's like, yes, this is happening for me. But then we have this emotional part of us that's like,
Mm-hmm.
she's like in the middle of the biggest hell she's ever lived in. She does
Right.
not want to hear that this is good for us. And so the way that we manage that, and this is a broad stroke of the brush, so maybe we can break this down a little bit, but in short terms, what we must be able to do is our inner adult self that wants to move forward. And she's sort of like pulling, right? She's like, come
It's
on,
true.
aren't you done suffering? Like, can we stop feeling
Yeah.
bad for ourselves, right? She's like,
Yeah.
let's go. So the relationship between these two parts is actually what determines whether we're able to truly move forward or not. Because
Mm-hmm.
if these
Mm-hmm.
two parts are fighting and one of them's like, that's it. I don't want to identify as a victim. I'm moving on. Whenever you're ready, you can come join me,
Yeah.
right? If they're snotty to each other or they're working against each other, then you actually can't, you'll move forward a bit and then you'll slingshot back. Move forward a bit, slingshot back.
So true.
So this is where, there's this modality called internal family systems or IFS or
Yes.
parts work, and a lot of people do it even if it doesn't matter. Like let's just
Even if
say,
they know the terms and the
yeah, we
modalities,
don't
they're
have to know
doing
the
it.
fancies.
Yeah.
We just need
Right.
to
Right.
know how we get our brain and body to be on the same page
Yeah.
so that we can move forward. And so
Right.
really going like you were just saying, Shelly, you were so good at what you said. You said really going to the part of you that's throwing a tantrum, the part of you
Yeah.
that just is so exhausted. She's so out of her mind, scared. She just really doesn't want to be here right now. She doesn't know what to
Mm-hmm.
do with this.
Mm-hmm.
And getting in touch, and this is sometimes where the help of a practitioner or maybe a yoga practice or anything that can help you, but getting in touch with your inner adult and having your inner adult go to this younger or this more
Yes.
scared part and
Yeah.
say, hey, I am sorry. I've been kind of mean to you. I've been judging you. I've been annoyed with you. And that's not okay because I need
Mhm.
you. I really
Yeah.
need you. We're a team. And so tell me your story. What are you feeling right now? Right? Like, just like you would want a good friend to do to you,
Yeah.
you do this to
Yeah.
this part of you.
Mm.
And what's interesting is little by little, it might not be in one conversation. It might take two or
Mhm.
three. You might feel like a crazy lady while you're walking your dog. You're just talking to yourself. But one by one little step at a time, you really can gain her trust and she will be willing to move forward with you.
Yeah.
You can get her
Yeah.
on board in a
So
loving way.
true. That's
Yeah.
so beautiful. I love that, Lizzie. It's like it really is just this like nurturing and kindness that we loving, t self-talk.
Yeah.
Because the ego can just be so powerful and
Yeah.
can really deter us from being our most authentic self. And
Yeah.
because we're
I
always trying
love
to
that.
protect, the ego is always trying to protect us. And we
Yeah.
need the ego, and we can say, "Thank you, ego. Now step aside, bitch, and
Yeah.
get off." Like,
Yeah, you know what? And also to add on to that, I remember realizing how really over masculine our world is. Like if you think
mm,
about the masculine is like linear progression and
yeah,
logic and problem solving and like, oh, there's
yes,
a problem, let's try and fix it, which we actually need sometimes. We love that logic. We love that just point blank, like let's get it done.
right,
And then the feminine is more of a journey and it's the being and the becoming and it's the deep feeling.
yes,
And
yes,
sometimes it's not it's the ego, yes, and it's also our masculine culture. And
yeah,
actually my spiritual awakening, so this is sort of a segue into the
good,
spiritual
good,
realm, which I know we're
yes.
both so stoked to talk about, you guys. We are coming out of our spiritual closets today. I'm so excited. But my spiritual awakening started as a feminine awakening when I started to recognize that there are two energies in all of humans, doesn't matter your gender or lack thereof. You've got a feminine and a masculine in you.
Yes,
And I
the
started to
Shakti and the
realize
Shiva.
that Shakti and Shiva, Shakti is the feminine. And I
Yeah,
started to realize when I started to be like, oh, we live in a time in history where the feminine was really deeply suppressed a long time ago, like generations ago before we were born. And
yes,
we just the air we're breathing in is quite masculine and we don't know different. And our
yes,
bodies do though. deep down.
Hmm.
And so that's actually when I started to think that way and approach life that way and be curious and open to that, my body started to show me what the feminine is. I started to remember my inner feminine, and I actually started to have a Kundalini awakening.
Beautiful.
Kundalini
Mhm.
is the feminine energy for anybody who doesn't know.
Yes.
And in Eastern philosophy, the Kundalini energy is at the base of your spine. And at some point in your life, it can release. And it's like a spiritual slash feminine awakening.
Yes, and also to add to that, it's the snake that it's the medical, what is it like on that's on
Oh,
the side
yeah.
of all of the ambulances. It's that
Yes.
symbol of the snake going around.
The
Yeah,
staff,
yeah. So that
like
is
in
just
Moses,
like
like the Bible or
us.
something.
Yeah, it's like our
Yes.
spine. That is our, and those are, people don't realize it. Like that's, it's so interesting because that's such a feminine symbol that's, rushing around on the ambulance to go take care of
Yeah.
people.
I actually had, if this is sounding like gibberish to you guys, like, trust me, it was to me. And I'm sure at one point for you, Shelly, like,
Yeah,
so, like, don't feel dumb if you're like, what are they talking
I
about?
know. I know there's people that won't
Because
be able to follow, but that's okay.
I'd
Yeah,
never
just
heard of
keep it.
Kundalini or Shakti.
Yeah.
So just keep listening because this gets
Yeah.
really good. Gets really good. It's really fun. It's a whole new
So,
world.
yeah. So how did you know you were having a Kundalini awakening? And I always associate Kundalini with the breath, with the
Mhm.
breath
Breath work.
practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you like me to share that story? Because
Yeah. I love
okay.
it.
Well, so I had had my first mental health episodes were back in 2014, 15, 16, kind of in that range. And then in 2020, I had become a certified life coach. I had learned some nervous system stuff. I still hadn't had my big trauma breakdown that I was talking about in Costa Rica, but I was more regulated than I'd ever been in my life and definitely more in touch with my I feel like I had done enough work to like release or integrate my traumatized parts to where my soul was gradually coming more into my body or being more fully expressed. Okay.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's how it felt as I look back. That's the effect I felt like I was having. Which is interesting because at the same time, I was actually leaving the religion I grew up in. I was
Hmm.
deconstructing the religion I grew up in, but yet feeling more spiritual than ever in my life.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I remember, it was during the pandemic. We were all, sheltering in place, whatever. And I remember one time my grandmother had just passed. So this was
Mm.
January. Let's see. I think this was January 2020, right before, shit hit the fan
Yeah.
with the
Hmm.
pandemic. But even just all that year, because I lost another grandmother. And so, anyway, I remember I sort of paused my business and I was seeing like an energy. No, she was a Reiki practitioner, healer person, and just doing a session with her. And we were both very blown away that my grandmother that had just passed, like, came to our session. We both felt her. I
Mm.
could see her with my eyes closed in my third eye. I could see her and she wrapped me in a blanket.
Mm.
And it was super comforting, but it felt like she was passing some matriarchal like thing to me, like some
Hmm.
mantle of feminine something. I don't know. It felt very like more than just, oh, I'm comforting you. It was like she was giving me something. And then
Hmm.
in another session with this same woman, both of my grandfathers came to me,
Mm.
and both each gave me a gift, and I could see them clearly in my third eye. They were each standing behind me. So my mother's father was on my right behind me, and my father's father was on my left, and they each
Hmm.
gave me a gift at that time. And this was just out of the blue, but yet in my deepest heart, I think I'd always hoped I could have an experience like that.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it was, on the one hand, it was like my dreams coming true. And on the other hand, my ego had no idea what to do with this. And I
Yeah.
sort of just shut it all down for a good 6 months because I was like, what is this? But it just sort of kept coming in little moments. And so one day I was just waking up in the morning and I remember in my third eye, or when you close your eyes, the darkness of your eyes, you can see things like flash above you, like flash in the
Colors
darkness of your
or
eyes
yeah.
closed.
Uh-huh.
That's the third eye.
Hmm.
That's the third eye. And so with practice, you can see things when your eyes are open in your third eye, but typically in the beginning, it helps to have them closed. And so I would have my
Mm.
eyes closed, I'd be waking up, and I remember seeing the Kundalini awakening symbol. It was like the staff with the snake. And I didn't know what I was seeing, so I
Yeah.
Googled it. I looked up like, staff, snake wrapped around it. What is this? And that is how I learned about Kundalini awakening. It wasn't like I had
Mhm,
anybody telling me about it. I didn't read it in a book or online.
mhm.
I saw it in my third eye and I went and looked it up. So spirit was sort of like teaching me and helping me navigate what was happening in my body, we could
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
And then
Nice.
from there, it just, little by little, and I'll share more stories, but
Yeah.
that's kind of
That's
how it began.
beautiful. That's so beautiful. But and also just getting back to like the masculine and feminine that's in each of us,
Yeah.
and how we do live in a masculine society, the linear society. Um, what and men can have the feminine, they men have the feminine in them as well, and they can
All beings. Yeah.
find, yeah. So I just want to just come back to that
Yeah.
really important point.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that as men age, I see that they are able to have more touch with their feminine side.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
this is like, it's just more softness, it's more awareness, it's more compassion, it's more empathy. Like I see that in my
Right.
husband, who's
Yeah.
we've been together for 28 years. So
Wow.
we've really seen each other progress in
Yeah.
our, and for many years I was hanging out in the masculine, side, masculine energy, working and going and doing and mothering. And even though I had my softness as a mother, I still was in the masculine,
Yeah.
energy and world. So that's just really interesting. And to just kind of reflect on. And also these, these gifts that you were, given by your grandparents, your ancestors, that from
Wow.
the other
Yes.
side,
Yeah.
are just, they're basically, when you say gifts, what exactly does that mean? Does that mean that you suddenly, the gift was for you was to be able to see in your third eye?
Hmm.
Is that the gift that you're
No,
saying?
no, so the third eye thing was just kind of happening in my body when my grandfathers gave me gifts. Like for example, one of them gave me the gift of like love. Um,
Mhm.
and the other one gave me a gift that would help me in my business at the time. So, a little bit of context, my husband had lost his job, and then we
Mhm.
had leveraged a second mortgage to purchase a small business, and we had lost the business with the pandemic.
Mm. Wow.
So, we were in a pinch, and my business was making a quarter of what we needed to just get by.
Mhm.
Because it was just sort of a hobby. Like my husband was the provider at the time, and I was homeschooling, so I had to quadruple the business, and this was sort of going on in the background. So I was in an initiation, you could say. I was in an intense time.
Yeah.
And this is the context for when they came to me and gave
Mhm.
me these gifts to help me in my life at that time. And they told me, here's what I'm giving you. And actually, the one grandpa, my mom's dad, I was mad at him because of some things he had done in his life that were harmful to our family. And I didn't want to take his gift at first.
Yeah.
So it was like, very real. And he just waited patiently until I was ready to receive what he was there to give me. But
Mm. Mhm.
and this was only like 10 minutes maybe of this
Mhm.
intense spiritual experience
Mhm.
or less. And it was very emotional. It wiped me out. I was tired the rest of that day.
I'm sure.
And since then I can count on only one hand the types of experiences I've had like that. So
Mhm. Mhm.
for whatever reason, it was this gorgeous, beautiful moment. But yeah,
Yeah.
those were the types of gifts is they were there to aid and assist me during this intense time. And actually, interestingly, both of those grandfathers started their own businesses
Oh,
and were
wow.
entrepreneurs. And so it's kind of
Oh,
neat that
yeah.
they came in and tended to me during that particular time.
Nice, nice. That's really beautiful.
Yeah.
It's so much, again, it's like, again, like surrendering, right? And you also had this beautiful support of the Reiki healer that,
She
kind of
was
helped
incredible.
to facilitate and ignite that and create that chemistry. And so for
Yeah.
people, so then this is a great segue into, so not only are you this life coach, but you also now are this psychic medium. And so how do you help people with with psychic, your psychic abilities? How do you support them?
Mm. Thank you for asking me that because when you even said the word psychic medium, or some people identify more as spiritual mediums, but I really felt the sacredness of that. And I wanted to reflect,
Mm,
Shelley, to you that I just wanted to remind everybody that we all have
mm,
the ability to channel and to feel clear and calm and safe in the usage of our spiritual capacities. But it's a journey to get there. And I just wanted to say that I just happen to have been on this journey for a little bit. And so, I've come into some clarity and ability, but um there aren't like certain people that are mediums and certain people who are not personally. This is my belief. And I've heard other mediums say this too, which is
Mm,
that it's more of yes, it's a calling and but it's I believe it's an acumen that we all have built
mm-hmm,
in. And
mm-hmm.
that one of the beautiful parts of how we're going to restore the world and humanity is people are going to start to get curious and they're going to start to want to open to those gifts and they're going to start doing so. And within your gifts, you will have your own strengths. You will have your own ways that spirit talks to you, but I really just wanted it feels so important especially because I know I came into my mediumship as an adult
Mm-hmm.
only a
Mm-hmm.
couple of years ago. And so I feel really passionately about letting everybody know that if you have a desire to, whether you want to be a full blown practicing medium, if that feels
Mm-hmm.
like a calling to you, or whether you just want to be closer to spirit and maybe have
Yeah.
some really meaningful guidance that you feel clear and connected to, whatever the usage is, that's up to you. But spirit will meet you where you want to be, and you
I
can
just,
you can do that.
that's so beautiful. I think that where there's so much comfort in it, for me is that like we're never alone. And
Never.
just to take that in and of itself, like that we aren't alone. I do talk about like the power of the unseen, and when I talk about the unseen, it is like I'd like to describe it, and I would love to know if this resonates with you as okay. I just for people that are like logical and are very in their linear minds, I take it as everything is math. Okay, so if math is logical, math is numbers and things that are figured out, equations,
Hmm.
we are all math, right?
Mm,
Everything that we make up in our bodies, our cells, it's math. That's how they figured out, like, okay, we know that you're made up of cells and atoms and all these things, and the only way that we figured out that that's true is because of math.
I
And
love that.
so then the same thing is true of if we can see that the universe, the way that we've taken rocket ships to the moon is because of math. And then we don't know everything. And
Mm,
how can we know the math equation? We know that all the math equations for things that are in 3D, right? And
mm,
then, but when you look at like when you cut open a cabbage and you see like imagine like a red cabbage, right? When you cut it, slice it down the middle, and you see all that amazing
mm,
5-dimensional
mm,
thing that's
mm,
right in front of you.
mhm.
That's math too.
Yeah.
And so that is something is creating all this
Mhm,
interconnectedness of
mhm,
all of
mhm,
our ecological systems, everything that's happening beneath the earth, in the earth. Like
mm.
we are part of
Wisdom.
that.
Speak, girl. Oh,
Yes.
oh,
So that's why
wow. Oh
I
my gosh.
believe in the unseen because
Oh,
it's so true. It's just true because if you break
yeah.
it down like that, because people are like, oh, maybe we've lost some people like, oh, you guys are talking about mediums and like psychic abilities and like, yeah, I don't, whatever. Well, okay, you don't have to believe. It's okay.
Mhm.
But I'm trying to break it down as like why I believe. I don't
Yeah.
know. So,
Yeah. I love that. I think it's okay and probably a healthy thing for people to be a little like cautious with this, right? Because um you can take it too far. There are people who are really not here. They're not in their
yeah.
brain and they're very woo-woo spiritual. And
Hmm.
so I think I'm not offended like as a spiritual person when people respond in a very skeptical way. I'm like,
Yeah.
you're doing your job to try to make sure that
Totally.
you're not duped. Like,
Yeah.
so good for you.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's also important though to see the other side of that, which is that so much skepticism can truly make us alone. It can truly cut us off from
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
dimensions.
Yeah.
And so you get to just play with the sense of balance that feels safe and good to you. And I will say that the safer you feel in these conversations, the closer you get to experiencing it. And I'm not just trying to say that to like keep you coming back for more or manipulate you.
No, no, it's so
But
true.
what I have found is that without a sense of safety,
Hmm.
you're not going anywhere. Like you're not
Right.
going to buy into, you're not going to go anywhere. And so it's really important that people feel safe to have these conversations. And so if listening to a podcast conversation is a safe place for you, lovely. If you're at a place where you're like, no, I want to work with somebody and like be trained on how to be tap into my psychic abilities or all of my clairaudience and clairvoyance, lovely. If that
Yeah.
but if you don't feel safe, you don't want to force it.
No, no.
So that's really important. I
Yeah,
think it's important for
beautiful.
people to feel safe. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, because there are a lot of charlatans out there that, claim all these things
Just
and
off their
but
rocker, a little
yeah.
imbalanced.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so, yeah, because I've definitely had like weird experiences that have made me believe and I know it,
Oh.
whether it's like
Oh.
signs for myself like that are
Uh-huh.
showing up. Like it's this is just the weird, I'll just tell this really quick story and then I
I
want to
want to
hear
hear
more
it.
about
We all
it's
want to hear it, Shelley. We want to hear every
so
detail.
so this
Tell
is
us your
something that
woo.
this is what happened recently.
Okay,
So
tell us.
my name is Shelly, as you know, and I spell it with an EY, and it's always been a thing for me. Like my name is never spelled right. People always like forget the second E. I was the girl that would go to the mall and look for the little license plate and the pens and everything. And name was never either my name wasn't there, or it wasn't spelled right. So whenever somebody signs, would sign something for me, there's two parts of the story. Whenever people would sign something for me, I would always say like, almost like, duh, like Mary Shelley, she wrote Frankenstein and she spelled it with an E. Do you know how to spell that? Then you know how to spell my name. Like
Uh-huh.
a little sass, just getting a little sassy with people because I would get
Uh-huh.
annoyed and be like, like Mary Shelley. So one day, I was at this event with this Indian author, and he was the brother, like the Indian brother of my one of my main teachers, Ram Dass. And
Uh-huh.
so his name was KK. So KK was signing his book that he had written all about Indian saints and all these mystical stories that were just amazing. And I hadn't read the book, so anyway, but I'm waiting in line to give him the book to sign. And he said, "What is your name?" And I said, "Shelley." And I was about to say, like Mary Shelley. And so before I could say it, he said, "Yes, yes, I know, like Mary Shelley with an EY." So,
Oh my
so I was
gosh.
like, yes, hello, like you get me. Like I was like in shock. So that was pretty
Wow.
wild. I had
He-
never, I
Yeah.
just said, listen to him. He doesn't know me. So then recently, it's names are just, I'm fixated on names. It's such a weird thing. And I,
It's probably a spiritual thing.
yeah, yeah, thanks. So so I teach, at this, spa, and I don't see people. I see them once and then I usually don't see them
It's like a
again.
resort or something. Hmm.
Yeah, it's a resort. So, um, in the last, where did I meet these people? So anyway, within this last month, I have met three Shelleys that spell it the same way.
Hmm.
And I mean, that just like never has happened before. And they're all in there. It's really interesting because all the women that I've met, well, one was in line at the grocery store and I was like helping her feel safe because she was feeling like somebody was cutting her in line and she was so happy that I was there and then we discovered we had the same name. And then
Mm.
there was somebody that showed up in my class that also had the same name and it's interesting. I think they were both in their 70s, but anyway,
Mm.
it was just really like really interesting affirmations, almost like little knocks on the door, like in my
Yes.
mind. I feel like it was saying like, "Hey, guess what, girl? I'm with
Yes.
you," you know?
Well, and you said earlier that you've heard your name called in your
Yeah,
sleep.
right.
So
Yeah.
if I were to play with this in a spiritual interpretation here, like just off of my intuition, it just does feel like there is a name being your name's being called. Your
Yeah.
attention is being yanked on, like in a good way.
Yeah.
And I think you through your feeling and the way you're living, you already know that.
Hmm.
And you're aware of that, and you're totally stepping closer and saying, I want to hear you, spirit, right? Like in your
Yes.
own ways. Because this, and I know this because we've chatted on the phone before this interview today. But um, yeah, like absolutely. This is how sometimes my angels use numbers I have an angel numbers book.
Uh-huh.
It has
Nice.
the numbers 1 to 999, and when I see a number that is really it's like a feel it's like I get a hit in my intuition with the number. So I can see numbers all the time, but
Yes.
sometimes I'll look at a clock and it's like goosh, like it means something, but I don't know what it means, but it means something. And
Yes.
so I will go look it up in my book and there's a message. Every number has a message.
Nice.
So anyway,
Beautiful. That's another great way to remember. Yeah, I mean, growing up, it was always a thing. We'd always be like, "Oh, four ones," when it
hmm
was 11:11. So we would,
yeah.
as a family, we would say that. But now, yeah, I see 555 and 444 all the time, and
Yeah.
yeah, so that's great. So we're getting to the end of our time, which I could
Yeah.
talk forever, but
Me too.
tell so and but people. I'm going to, in the show notes, I'm going to put your links of where people can find you. And
Yeah.
so I would love to say that to listeners that people can book consultations with Lizzie for both the coaching and for medium support as well. Is that
Yeah.
true?
So you can
Okay.
book a reading if you just want like a one and done, like, hey, I'd like to have a reading with you from you. And then so that you just pay for it and then show up. And then you can also book a free consultation if you'd like to book maybe a package for coaching slash mediumship. When I do
Great.
coaching, I always keep my third eye open. I always keep and so sometimes we'll be coaching and then I'll feel a grandmother come through, or I will feel a guide introduce themselves and they want to
Mhm.
introduce themselves to you. And so, but that can happen in a reading or coaching. The coaching just happens to be more nervous system focused. If you feel like I really want to get into the spiritual thing, but I really think I need to get my life together a little bit more first, not because you're not worthy, but
Yeah.
because part of part of the process of tuning into spirit, because it is subtle energy, it does take energy from us and it takes capacity to
Mm,
hear and to listen and to receive. It doesn't take worthiness to receive, it just takes
yes.
focus and attention, which can be hard sometimes. And so the coaching we do would be in preparation for that. But remembering that you guys have your guides always with you, and you'll know the right time and the right place and the right person. You'll feel it.
Beautiful. That's such a perfect end note
Yeah,
to end on. Thank you so much for being here and where everyone is supported and you're never alone. And please find Lizzie and in the show notes. And I highly encourage you to work with her. So thanks for coming on.
of course. It was my pleasure.